So welcome to another one of our video conversations with IDI members. My name's David Fromm, and I'm a member of the IDI. I'm talking today with Reuven Merhav, who has worn many hats over his long career in Israel. Reuven, welcome.
Thank you very much, and honored to be with you.
It's wonderful to see you again. We haven't seen each other since Vienna last year, but I'm very glad to see that you're doing well. So how are you?
Well, we have problems. The global politics are not a reason for great joy. We have political problems here. You have the same problems in the United States, problem of a, so to say, strong leader who does weak things. And sometimes you think, this is what we have been working for all these years, to get this kind of a country, to get this kind of a regime, calling it democracy, but on the other hand, it sometimes loses the nature of a real democracy, because everything is guided today by the public information or by propaganda, and the days of the serious discussion are actually over. And the politics is being guided by gimmicks. And you, David Fromm, and me, Reuven Merhav, if you are not qualified to do gimmicks, you are not in the game. So the question is how to translate the capabilities and the abilities of a group like the IDI to put it into practice without becoming cheap politicians, by trying to touch on the core questions of our time and of our countries, and what is most important, to be of real influence and to do something practical in the way John Alderdice and his colleagues did a few years ago in Northern Ireland, which is, I think, should be an example to all of us. And I think if out of the ingathering of 20 people once or twice a year, you have only a small idea which may develop later and then change things, because all of us have access to the people whom we call decision makers and to the public opinion, and we are, if I may say so, respected people. So if we open our mouth together and put our things together, we may exert some influence, which is a very positive development. But for that, you need a lot of patience. And the one thing we have learned, I certainly have learned, and John has learned, and Barak has learned, that without patience, you can't do anything. You can't impress people just by a gimmick, and you have to come in very deeply and speak to them very thoroughly and find the right moment, and to see if you can really have some real input. You have to be patient for it.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. In the United States, we have a president who, could have seized an opportunity to rally the country, rally both the left and the right wings of the country to engage in this battle against this pandemic. But instead, it seems as if he's decided his best bet for re-election is to divide the country, to turn this into a political battle and rally his supporters for the upcoming election in November, which has been incredibly disappointing and frankly, I think has contributed a great deal to the suffering that we've had here in the United States. What's been the situation in Israel as far as the protocols for battling the pandemic?
Well, let me get back first of all, to the political picture. What happened in the United States, and it's a very superficial observation, that Democrats became Republicans and Republicans became Democrats. I mean, the old value of the old Republicans who were really democratic and doing fine things, and then you have the Democrats, part of whom go for the cheap gimmicks, and you don't know who's who in the zoo. And this is very, very difficult to discern. And this will have a great impact on the next elections. You are lucky to have elections only once in 4 years, because we had in 1 year 3 general elections. And what you had is the guy who is the chief promoter and presenter. His name is Benjamin Netanyahu. He is a born salesman, and he is a genial salesman. And he can. Yesterday he sold furniture. Today he will sell political ideas. the day after tomorrow he will sell new ideas, and when he sells them, he makes the impression as if it is the most genuine thing on the earth, which it is not. So this is a big question. At the same time, there is a battle between our legal system, which is still quite strong, and the High Court and what have you, and the political cheap gimmicks which are being run very ably by Netanyahu and by his followers. And for us, people who have been working and fighting and building things for Israel for 50, 60 years, this is a great tragedy, and we don't see how we come out of it. And for us, it is a sad time, and our greatest mission is to buttress the legal system and to keep, under all circumstances, the basic democracy in Israel, which is true democracy, should prevail. And I think, to a certain extent, you have a similar problem, although differently painted in the United States. So in that respect, we can learn from each other, and we can try to rectify things and to build things, though it is very difficult.
You'll be happy to know that I spoke with Hiba on a call like this, and she's doing well. And she was talking a lot about how her community, at least initially, really kind of rallied together, both of the kind of governmental structures, but also the individuals in her community rallied together to provide food and provide medical care, and to try to do what they could to ease suffering and really to prevent the spread of the virus. And I'm wondering if that's been your experience in Israel.
Well, in a way, there still is on the walls a very good cooperation in that sphere between the Palestinian Authority and us. And as you may know, our personal relations, Robbie and mine, with Hiba are excellent. I was lucky to meet her somewhere, and then I asked her to join us, and she did. And she's a great small lady, in the sense that she has her principles, she's well entrenched in her society, she has influence. But then, of course, in the Arab society, you have all these extremists, exactly as you have them in Israel, and there is an ongoing struggle between them. And what we should do, or whatever we can, is to try and help the Palestinian Authority, and we do give them some help. And the medical help was a very good example to that, because after all, what you see is that the spread of the virus in Israel and in the Palestinian Authority is very small, because we took very tough measures. Perhaps we committed some mistakes from the beginning, but nobody was prepared for such things, even Gates. So in that respect, this gives us hope. At the same time, the government or Netanyahu, for cheap political gains, is pushing this question of the annexation and of the Jordan Valley. And of course, by that, he's going to ruin his relationship with the Jordanians, with Abdullah, and indirectly also with the Egyptians, because the country which cannot honor its international commitments is not worth to be a member of the family of nations. And in that respect, we'll have a big fight. So I do hope that the Americans will be wise enough, and I do hope that Democrats will have the day, because what we heard today, what we heard recently from Biden, was that he's not going to support this annexation. And I think it will be a tragic mistake if we do it. And for the time being, we have some unpleasant signs of the Palestinian Authority who are suspending cooperation in security matters. And we have to balance it somehow, and this is a very great task. And for a government which is based on a very poor coalition, in which the major party which ran the elections under the slogan of changing the government joined Netanyahu, I'm very doubtful if we can do that. And in that respect, you find us, all of us, in a very bad So I'm afraid that in that respect, my views are not very bright. I can only tell you that we are lucky, together with the Palestinians, that the spread of the pandemic was very small. And the same happened to Gaza Strip, which to my mind is a miracle. And if you compare it with a country like Spain or France or even Germany or whatever, it is a miracle.
Or the US for that matter. The US is still seeing an expansion of infections. We've had 100,000 deaths, I think, as of yesterday, which is a lot of people. Now, I don't know if you want to get into this, but the rationale that was offered by the Blue and White, by Gans, in joining with Netanyahu was that during a pandemic, the country should be unified. Do you have thoughts about that?
It was a very cheap excuse because even under a minority interim government, which was governing for almost a year and a half or 2 years, you could take very harsh measures, which we took, and you could impose very strict regulations, which we did. You didn't need for that a larger government. You could do it with a smaller government because our legal system allows for that. Our legal system emanates from the days of the British, in which under dire straits of security and of defense, you can use certain powers, and these powers have been implied in the case of the corona. So the excuse of General Gantz and his colleagues to join the government on these grounds sounds very nice, but it is not really true.
We had some in the U.S., especially in New York City, which was the epicenter of our outbreak. There were some problems in the borough of Brooklyn, many involving the Hasidic community there, who would gather for funerals or for other gatherings, and was at least a little bit resistant to social distancing requirements. I think that's changed for the better, which has been wonderful. But it was something that was interesting because it felt a bit like there was a retreat to the large group identity of that community in the face of this external threat of the pandemic. That in the face of this invisible and terrifying infection, the reaction of certain groups throughout the country was to coalesce around their large group identity, their idea of themselves as part of a group, and as part of that group to resist the spread. Of course, it worked just the opposite because the larger the group, the more the spread occurred.
No, of course, you're right. But you had the same thing in other countries. My only astonishment is because now we are still at the end of the Ramadan. And during the Ramadan, the prayers, many people gather there and they come to the mosque and whatever. And then you have these parties, this iftar, which is the dinner after the daily fast. And then many people come together, large families and what have you. And it is to me a miracle how it didn't spread much more in the Arab world or the Muslim world. But coming back to these religious groups, most of them were Hasidic Jews. You had the same in Israel. And it was not until the rabbis or the religious authorities imposed very, very strict regulations that it didn't change. And at the same time, you had some extremist groups, very extremist enough. Some of these groups number in Israel, let's say 5,000, 10,000 people. And they said, what the Lord commanded us directly is together and to pray together and what have you. And sometimes you had to bring in the police and you had to have the involvement. And you had the same yesterday in the Argentine and of course in New York. So when people have direct connections to the Lord, which I don't have, it's very difficult to speak to them, and you have to use force, real sheer force, in order to impose the regulation on them. It's a tragedy, and the community pays the price, and all of us pay the price.
It's remarkable, isn't it? And of course, it's not just religious groups. In northern Italy, it was families and weddings, and then funerals, any place where groups would gather. In South Korea, it was a nightclub. In Boston, it was a biotech conference. When people would come together, perhaps seeking strength in community or seeking support in community, those were the occasions that oftentimes resulted in a larger spread of this disease. I don't know about Israel, but we've had no school for our kids since March. We've had very, very limited social outings. All the restaurants are closed. The schools are closed. All of the elective medical procedures have been canceled. Everybody has been just kind of staying quietly at home. There are occasional outings where you might go, pick something up, or you might go drive by a friend's house and wave at them from the street. But everybody is keeping to themselves for the most part, and has been for 10 weeks.
One thing, perhaps there is something positive in the whole thing by having this remote learning system. This may spread the education somehow, the adult education. I mean, we must see the positive in the developments. And people who never had access to public media as means of education may perhaps do it now. And then I'm sure there will be a great development in this area, and there will be a great technical development, and the technical facilities for that, due to competition, may become cheaper and more accessible to people. So in that respect, I think we can also expect some positive results because of the closure of the schools, and because many people remained squeezed in the flats with their kids and so on. So apart from very negative results of it, what you had is that people would listen more and would see more and would learn more. So let's also see the bright side. In that respect, I think we have seen only the beginning of it.
There certainly has been an increase in the awareness that people can distance themselves and not lose their community. Although there's also been a huge rise in mental health issues, and the big concern here, as I'm sure it is there, is what effect this time will have on the next generation coming forward. Time will tell how they adjust when they return to their schools and to their friends. Here with our young children, we can really feel the ache that they have for structure and for friendship and for their social circle. So we try to keep them connected to their friends as best we can. But of course, it's very different than it used to be. But we're trying hard, and they seem to be doing okay. Is your family spread out, or have they come back together?
No, it's only the two of us. The kids are elsewhere, and they stick together. My elder son happens to live in California, and they are with the boys who are now boys. I mean, one is 17, one is 22. They are at home, and they find their way. But I was going to say that we had a very wise philosopher and scientist whose name was Leibovich, very famous, also politically very progressive. And he once said that the only human feeling that has changed over recent generations is this velocity, the speed. Because things today develop much faster because of the technical means. And I think, especially you and even I, may see within 5 or 10 years great changes in the educational systems. It will become the older system of squeezing people or pupils in classes will give way to other alternatives. And in that respect, the corona will have a very positive influence. And I'm sure that the kids of day after tomorrow will have access to other things which we didn't have. So we must always also see the bright side. The other thing is that the competition for developing medicines is going to grow, not only because of the economic factor, but also because of the awareness and the position of the status of the scientists who are dealing with these things is going to be much more elevated, and they are going to be much more recognized, and perhaps they'll get more means from the governments to promote the research. And in that respect, I think the corona, we must work very hard to have, but we may find 2 or 3 bright sides about it.
I know you have a special interest in China, Reuven, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are, very anecdotally, about whether or not the virus provides an opportunity for China to enlarge its global profile and perhaps even step into certain voids of international leadership, with the U.S. pulling back from the international community.
I'm grateful to you because it was last October when we were in Vienna that I've raised the Chinese question from the point of view of group politics or group identity. And what I thought always, and I still think that the gap with China is to a great extent an historical one, and first and foremost, a psychological one. It's very difficult to understand them. And in order to understand them, we have to be very patient, and we usually are not patient. And I always remember what Mao Zedong said when he was asked about the French Revolution. He said, it's too early to judge. Of course, things have changed since, and the technology has come. And you have today, perhaps almost half of the Chinese population is living in cities and have access to technical means. But I think that, first of all, we don't know enough. And when I raised the question in October, I thought we are ripe, we are ready to start working on it. But then I changed my mind completely. I just wrote a letter to certain David Fromm, and told them that whatever I thought then in October does not hold water now. We have to learn more, we have to understand more, and to see who is who in the Zoom. And let's not forget one thing, that of course the word, the expression yellow perry did not, was not related to China, it was related to the Japanese in Australia. But the name yellow perry remained. And people always think the Chinese as the masses who are going to come and settle to take the riches. What the Chinese have been doing in recent 50 or 100 years is to change the image, to develop very much, and to become an eligible member of the greater club of powers. And today, actually, there are only two of them. If you don't count the European Union, is not a great power, it is a great federation. And what people try to do, and what your president was very strong in, he was blaming China for everything. But it may have started in China, it may have not started in China, it doesn't matter. What matters is if the world can learn a lesson, can work together in order to fight the pandemic, and to learn from the Chinese how to control or how to govern their people without, for them to 40 million people at home is like for you putting your family at home. But the question is how you do it while still keeping some kind of a democracy. And I remember, this goes back to the 60s of last century, when the Chinese were commissioned to build a railway from Zambia to Tanzania to export the copper from the dollar, because then you had Southern Rhodesia, they blocked the ports and what have you. And people say, oh, you have the Chinese will come and settle, and East Africa will become Chinese. They worked 4 years, they finished in time, and the moment they finished, they went to the big ships and disappeared. The Chinese never had the urge to conquer other countries. They always wanted to have a security belt around them, a very large belt, because they're a big country. And if they want to do something economically or politically or culturally, they don't use soldiers, and they use the methods which other nations have been using for years. And in that respect, the way, psychological way, and political way, and economic way, and scientific way to cooperate with the Chinese is of the greatest importance. And if with that we can, our group can contribute something, because we have a few people who are working with China, Robbie and Rami, and I've been doing some work, but in a different sphere. I think we could contribute a lot to the aims and goals of the IDI.
I think that's a great idea. So Reuven, I've had you now for half an hour, and I guess I should let you go, but I've really enjoyed this conversation, and there's a million ways, a million directions it could go if we had more time and we were sitting together in some cafe in Vienna or in Israel somewhere. But I wanted to say that I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me, and it's wonderful to see you, and it's wonderful to see you in such good health.
Well, I can only reciprocate and again repeat what I said before, that 10 years ago, 9 years ago, when I joined the IDI, I was brought here by Robbie. I'm very grateful to him for that. This gave a different angle in my life, and it introduced me to people who are very, very valuable in their own by their own faculties, and it is a pleasure and honor to work with them and to think with them. And after all, don't forget that if you take us 20 or 25 people, we can approach anybody in the world, and we can express our ideas everywhere, and we should always be heard, provided we do it in the right way. And allow me to thank you for inviting me, and I'm at your disposal, and you still owe me a cup of coffee in Vienna.
I can't wait. Please give my best to your family, and I wish you all the best.